It was just another morning in a quiet part of the city. The sun was rising, but most people were still tucked under their blankets, trying to squeeze out a few more minutes of sleep before the day began. Not everyone, though. In one small apartment building on the corner of Maple and Fifth, a teenager was already wide awake and getting ready for a long day. His name was Eli. He was 17, tall and thin, with tired eyes and calloused hands. He didn't have much, just a worn-out backpack, second-hand clothes, and a dream he didn't talk about too much. He lived alone in a small one-bedroom unit at the end of the hall. It wasn't fancy, but it was his home, and he fought every day to keep it. Eli had been on his own for almost a year now. Life hadn't given him much, but it had taught him how to work hard. He got up before sunrise, made himself a cup of instant coffee, and packed a sandwich for lunch. Then he slipped out the door quietly, careful not to wake anyone else in the building. He worked nights at a small diner across town, flipping burgers and cleaning tables until well after midnight. By the time he got home, his feet ached and his mind was foggy, but even then he'd sit at his tiny kitchen table and study for school. He had to stay sharp. He had dreams, big ones, and they weren't going to come true by sleeping through them. The building Eli called home wasn't perfect. The paint was peeling in some spots, and the heater only worked when it felt like it. Still, it was clean, and Eli kept it neat. He knew rent wasn't cheap, and he knew one missed payment could mean losing everything. Downstairs, in the small office tucked behind a dusty window, sat the man who owned the place. He was older, with gray hair and a calm way about him. People called him Mr. Delaney. He was polite enough, but he didn't smile much. He kept to himself, and most tenants barely saw him except when rent was due. What no one knew was, Mr. Delaney wasn't really the owner's name. That was just the name he used. The real owner of the building was someone else entirely, a man who believed in doing things differently. He wanted to understand what life was like for the people who lived in his building, so he decided to see it firsthand. He took on a new identity and started working as a janitor at the very place he owned. He cleaned halls, fixed broken lights, and listened, really listened, to what people said when they thought no one was watching. He didn't want pity or praise. He just wanted to know the truth, and over time, one person caught his attention more than the others. Eli. Every morning, the man would watch from a distance as Eli left for work. Every night, he'd see the light flicker on in that same apartment, staying on long after most of the building had gone dark. He noticed how Eli helped carry groceries for Mrs. Ruiz downstairs, even when she didn't ask. How he fixed the broken lock on the back door without being paid. How he always said good morning with a real smile, even when he looked exhausted. But more than anything, he noticed how hard Eli was fighting, and how close he was to breaking. One cold afternoon, Eli came rushing into the office. His uniform was stained and his face was flushed. He handed the man a folded piece of paper, a note he had clearly written the night before. "Please," Eli said, voice low. "I know I'm late again. Just give me a few more days. I'll get you the rest." The man took the note and nodded slowly. Inside, his chest tightened. He had seen this before, the struggle, the shame, the fear. He remembered what it felt like to be young and broke, and carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Later that evening, the man watched Eli return from work. He was dragging his feet, eyes heavy. When he reached his door, he paused for a moment, breathing deeply before stepping inside. That night, the man sat alone in the office, looking through the records. He pulled up Eli's file. Rent payments, inconsistent. Income, barely enough. No family listed. No emergency contact. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He could evict Eli. It wouldn't be the first time someone lost their home because they couldn't keep up. But something about this kid felt different. Maybe it was the way he carried himself. Maybe it was the way he never gave up, even when life kept knocking him down. Or maybe it was because, once upon a time, the man had been in Eli's shoes. He closed the folder and stood up. He wasn't sure what he was going to do yet, but he knew he couldn't just walk away. There was something about Eli, something worth saving. And sometimes, all it takes is one person seeing you, really seeing you, to change everything. Eli lived every day like it was a race against time. School, work, bills, survival. They all pulled at him like weights on his back. But he never let them drag him down completely. He woke up early every morning, even before his alarm. He'd sit on the edge of his bed for a second, just breathing, trying to gather the strength to start again. His room was small, barely enough space for a bed, a desk, and a tiny closet. But it was his space, the only place where he could feel like he had some control. After getting dressed, he slipped on his worn-out jacket and walked out into the hallway. The building was quiet at that hour, except for the soft hum of the lights above. Sometimes he'd see the janitor already working, an older man with tired eyes and steady hands. Eli didn't know much about him, but he always gave him a nod. Everyone deserved respect, no matter what they did. At school, Eli kept his head down and stayed focused. He wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't have fancy clothes or expensive sneakers, but he paid attention in class, asked questions when he needed to, and helped others when he could. Teachers liked him. Some even tried to check in on him once in a while, but Eli always said he was fine. Truth was, he wasn't fine. Not really. One afternoon, after a long shift at the diner, Eli came home soaked from the rain. He hadn't brought an umbrella. Couldn't afford one. His shoes were ruined, and his backpack felt heavier than usual. He opened the door to his apartment and stepped inside, shivering. The heater wasn't working again. He looked around the room and sighed. He had tried fixing it himself last week using a guide he found online. It worked for a few days, then died again. He knew he should call maintenance, but he also knew that meant another fee, money he didn't have. So instead, he grabbed a blanket from under the bed and wrapped it around his shoulders. He made himself a cup of instant noodles and sat down, at the table staring at his books. He wanted to study, but his eyes were heavy. His body ached. His mind was tired. Still, he forced himself to open his notebook. He flipped through pages, wrote down notes, and read quietly under the dim light of his desk lamp. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, Eli stayed awake long after most people had gone to sleep. Downstairs, the janitor watched the security feed. Saw Eli sitting alone, studying by the glow of a single light. Saw how he rubbed his eyes, how he kept going even when he looked so close to giving up. The man leaned back in his chair and ran a hand through his hair. He thought about how hard Eli was fighting, and how unfair it all was. Later that week, Eli got a letter in the mail. It was short and cold, a reminder that rent was due. Again. He stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. When he read the words inside, his stomach dropped. His payment was late. Again. He knew this would happen. He had been hoping to catch a break at work, maybe get a few extra hours, maybe earn a little more tip money. But the diner had cut shifts because business was slow. There was nothing he could do. That night, Eli sat on the floor of his apartment, looking at the numbers on a crumpled piece of paper. He added and subtracted, tried to find a way to make ends meet. But no matter how many times he counted, it never added up. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He didn't want to ask for help. Asking for help meant showing weakness. It meant admitting that maybe, just maybe, he couldn't do this alone. But sometimes life doesn't give you a choice. The next morning, Eli went downstairs. His hands were shaking as he knocked on the office door. Inside, the janitor heard the knock and stood up slowly. He knew who it was before he even opened the door. Eli stood there, eyes low, holding another folded note. "I'm sorry," he said, softly. "I just need a few more days." The janitor took the note and nodded. He didn't say much, just gave Eli a look. Not angry, not cold. Something else. Something Eli couldn't quite name. As Eli turned to leave, the man watched him walk away, and something inside him shifted, because he saw more than just a kid who couldn't pay rent. He saw someone who was trying, really trying, to hold on to hope, and maybe, Just maybe. It was time to do something about it. The cold kept getting worse. It wasn't just the weather, though that was bad enough. Winter had settled in hard, wrapping the city in frost and making every morning feel like a battle against the chill. But it was also the way Eli felt inside, like he was always one step behind, always trying to catch up, never quite making it. He had missed school again, not because he didn't want to go, not because he didn't care, but because sometimes life doesn't give you a choice. That morning his phone had buzzed with a message from work. No shifts today. Business slow. Come back tomorrow. Eli read the message and sat on the edge of his bed for a long time. No shift meant no paycheck. And no paycheck meant even less chance of catching up on rent. He looked at the calendar on his wall. Red marks filled most of the boxes, reminders, deadlines, things he couldn't afford to forget. One square stood out more than the others, the date when his next payment was due. 2 days away. He knew what would happen if he couldn't come up with the money. He'd already been late once this month, twice before that. Every time he begged for more time. Every time he promised he'd make it right. But how many times could someone ask for help before they were seen as a problem instead of a person? That afternoon, Eli walked to the job center across town. It was a long walk, but he didn't have bus fare. His sneakers were soaked by the time he got there. He waited in line for over an hour, filling out forms for temporary jobs, anything that might bring in a little extra cash. When he finally stepped up to the counter, the woman behind the desk barely looked at him. "Any experience?" she asked, typing something into her computer. "A few jobs," Eli said. "Diner work, some cleaning, I've done tutoring online." She nodded, not really listening. "We'll call if something comes up." Eli thanked her and walked back, outside. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. He passed a small food pantry near the train station and decided to stop in. There weren't many people there, just a couple of older men and a mother with 2 young kids. Inside, a volunteer handed him a small bag, bread, peanut butter, and a can of soup. It wasn't much, but it was something. As he walked home, holding the bag close to keep it dry, he thought about everything. About school, about work, about the heater that still didn't work, about the letter he had to write tonight. Another plea for more time. And then, there was the fear. The one he didn't talk about. The one that crept in late at night when the room was quiet and the lights were low. What if he lost his apartment? What would he do then? There was no family to fall back on, no safety net, just him. He tried not to think about it too much, but sometimes it was all he could think about. That night, Eli sat at his desk again. He wrote the letter slowly, carefully. Each word felt heavier than the last. "I know I'm late again," he wrote. "I promise I'll pay as soon as I can. Please, just give me a few more days." He folded the paper and tucked it into an envelope. Then he opened his notebook and started studying. Even now, even with everything falling apart, he kept going. Because quitting wasn't an option. Not yet. Downstairs, the janitor watched the security feed. He saw Eli come home late, soaked and tired. Saw him sit down at his desk and open his books. Saw him eat a piece of bread with nothing on it because that was all he had. The man leaned forward in his chair. He had seen a lot of tenants over the years. Some who took advantage. Some who complained about everything. Some who barely paid attention to their own lives. But Eli? Eli was different. He worked harder than most adults. He showed kindness without expecting anything in return. He carried the weight of the world on his shoulders and still found the strength to keep going. The man rubbed his eyes and sighed. He had told himself he was just here to observe, to understand, to learn. But watching Eli struggle, knowing he could help, made staying silent feel like doing nothing at all. So he made a decision. That night, he pulled up Eli's records again, looked at his payment history, his income, his living conditions. Then he picked up the phone and made a call. Thar. Next day, Eli went downstairs and knocked on the office door. He held the letter in his hand, nervous but determined. The janitor opened the door. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then the man stepped aside and motioned for Eli to come in. Eli hesitated. He had never been invited inside before. Usually, the door stayed closed unless it was time to pay. He stepped in slowly. The office was small. A desk, a chair, a filing cabinet, and a window that looked out onto the hallway. Nothing fancy. Eli placed the letter on the desk. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I just need a few more days." The man looked at the letter. Then he looked at Eli. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. Eli blinked. "What?" The man smiled gently. "You heard me. You're not getting evicted. Your rent is taken care of." Eli's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't know what to say. "But how?" he asked. "Why?" The man stood up and walked over to the window. He looked out at the building, at the people coming and going, at the lives moving forward, each with their own struggles. "Because sometimes," he said, "people like you deserve a break." Eli stared at him. He wanted to ask more questions. To understand why this stranger, this quiet janitor, was suddenly helping him when no one else had. But before he could speak, the man turned back to him. "And it's not just rent," he added. "You're getting more than that." Eli's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" The man reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were papers, official-looking ones. "There's a program," he explained. "Support for students like you, housing, food, help with school supplies. Someone just has to believe in you." Eli swallowed hard. His hands were shaking. He had spent so long fighting alone, so long trying to hold everything together by himself, and now someone was telling him he didn't have to anymore. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he blinked them away. "Thank you," he whispered. The man nodded. "You earned this. I just gave it to you." Outside, the wind was still blowing. The sky was still gray. Winter was still cold. But for the first time in a long time, Eli felt something warm, something real. Hope. Eli didn't sleep much that night, even though he had a roof over his head for now, even though the weight of rent wasn't crushing him anymore. His mind wouldn't slow down. He kept replaying what had happened in the office. The janitor, the man who had always been quiet, who never said more than he needed to, had changed everything with just a few words. "You're not getting evicted. Your rent is taken care of." And then, "You're getting more than that." It felt like a dream, one Eli was afraid to believe in too fast. But when morning came and he walked downstairs again, the man was still there, still behind the desk, still real. "I thought maybe you'd come back," the man said with a small smile. Eli stood in the doorway, hands deep in his pockets. I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything," the man replied. "Just take it and keep going." He handed Eli the folder again, the one with all the papers inside. Eli opened it slowly. There were forms filled out, approvals stamped, notes about support programs for students in need. He read through them carefully, trying to understand. This wasn't just help with rent. This was long-term support. Food, clothing vouchers, school, supplies, even a chance at an internship later in the year. All of it offered without Eli asking for anything else after that first letter. He looked up at the man, eyes full of questions. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. The man leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "I used to be like you," he said after a pause. "I grew up with nothing. Had to work hard for every little thing. Nobody gave me a break. I had to fight for it." He looked out the window for a moment, watching the world move by. "Sometimes," he continued, "people like you get missed. You're not loud. You don't complain. You just try your best and hope someone notices." He turned back to Eli. "Well," he said softly, "someone noticed." Eli swallowed hard. He didn't cry, not right then. But something inside him shifted. For the first time, he wasn't carrying everything alone. That week, things started to change. The heater in Eli's apartment was fixed, quietly, without him having to ask. A new blanket and a box of groceries showed up outside his door one morning. He knew who they were from, but there was no note, just kindness. Word spread through the building slowly. Some people saw Eli talking to the janitor more often. Others noticed how he seemed lighter, less stressed. Mrs. Ruiz, the older woman who lived downstairs, stopped him one day as he carried her groceries up. "You look different," she said, "like something good finally went your way." Eli smiled. "Yeah," he said, "maybe it did." At school, his teachers noticed too. He was more focused, more confident. He raised his hand more in class, started asking for extra assignments. One of his teachers pulled him aside after class. "You've got something special," she told him. "Don't let life talk you out of it." Eli nodded. "I won't." He didn't tell anyone about the changes in his life. Not exactly. But he felt them, in the warmth of his apartment, in the food in his fridge, in the peace that came with knowing he didn't have to live in fear of losing everything. Still, he didn't stop working. He kept showing up at the diner, kept tutoring, online, kept studying late into the night, because he knew this help wasn't charity, it was belief. Someone believed in him enough to give him a chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. One afternoon, the man called him downstairs again. "Come in," he said, motioning toward the chair. Eli sat down. "I've been thinking," the man began. "You're good with people. You work hard, you listen, you care." He paused. "There's something else I want to offer you." Eli tilted his head. "What?" "A job," the man said. "Not here, not cleaning halls or fixing lights. Something bigger." He slid another paper across the desk. It was an application for a youth mentorship program. Part-time, paid, working with kids who were going through the same things Eli had gone through. "You could help others," the man said. "Show them they're not alone." Eli stared at the paper. He hadn't ever imagined himself in a role like that. He was just a kid, just trying to make it through each day. But maybe that was why he was perfect for it. He looked up. "When do I start?" The man smiled. "Whenever you're ready." Outside, the sky was clearing, the cold wind was still blowing, but the sun was peeking through the clouds. And somewhere inside Eli, something was growing. Not just hope, purpose. He had been given a second chance. Now he was going to use it, not just for himself, but for everyone who still needed someone to see them, to believe in them, to help. Eli started his new job a week later. It wasn't much at first. Just a few hours a week helping out with a youth program run by a small foundation. He met kids who had stories like his. No family, not enough money, too many responsibilities for someone so young. At first, he didn't know what to say to them. He wasn't a teacher. He wasn't some big success story. He was still in school himself, still figuring things out. But then he realized something. He didn't need to have all the answers. He just needed to show up, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, he sat across from a boy named Leo. He looked about 12, maybe 13. Thin frame, quiet eyes. The kind of kid who kept his head down and tried not to be noticed. They were supposed to be talking about school, but after a while, Leo asked Eli a question. "Did you ever feel like giving up?" Eli thought about it. Every time his heater broke, every time he missed a meal, every time he stood in line waiting for help. Yes, he had felt like giving up, but he didn't say that right away. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "I used to feel like I was fighting alone. Like nobody saw me." Leo nodded slowly. "I feel like that," he whispered. Eli smiled gently. "I know, but you're not alone now." He told Leo about how he used to carry groceries for Mrs. Ruiz downstairs. How he fixed things in his apartment because he couldn't afford to call for help. How he stayed up late studying even when he was tired. And as he talked, he saw something shift in Leo's face. Hope. Not a big, flashy hope. Just a quiet one. The kind that grows slowly, like a seed planted in cold soil. After that, Eli came back. Every week, he helped kids with homework. He listened when they didn't want to talk. He showed up on days when no one else did, and slowly, he became someone others could count on. Back at the building, life was changing too. The janitor, the man who had changed everything, started showing up more. Not just in the office, but in the halls, talking to people, asking how they were doing, fixing lights without being asked. People noticed. Mrs. Ruiz said it best one day when she passed him in the hallway. "You've got a good heart," she told him. "Don't hide it for too long." He just smiled and thanked her. Downstairs, the office door stayed open more often. People stopped by with questions, with problems, sometimes just to say hello. And Eli? He started feeling like part of something bigger. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. One evening after a long week, Eli knocked on the office door. Again, the man opened it with a nod. "Come in," he said. Eli stepped inside and sat down. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said. "Again." The man chuckled. "You don't have to keep thanking me." "I know," Eli said. "But I mean it." There was a pause. Then Eli added, "You believed in me before I believed in myself." The man looked at him for a moment. "That's because I saw something in you," he said. "Something worth believing in." Eli lowered his eyes. "I didn't think anyone would ever see me," he admitted. "Like really see me." The man leaned forward. "We all get missed sometimes," he said. "But once someone sees you, it changes everything." Eli nodded. It already had. Outside, the sun was setting. The sky turned orange and pink, lighting up the windows of the building. Inside, Eli sat a little taller. He wasn't just working to survive anymore. He was working to help others do the same. Weeks passed, then months. Spring came, bringing warmer weather and longer days. Flowers bloomed in the small garden outside the building. Kids played in the park across the street. Life kept moving, and so did Eli. He graduated high school with honors, not because he was perfect, because he worked hard, because he never gave up, because he had support when he needed it most. At the ceremony, he looked out into the crowd. His teachers were there. Mrs. Ruiz waved from the second row. Leo sat with his foster mom, smiling proudly, and in the back, standing quietly, was the man who had changed everything. After the ceremony, Eli walked over to him. "I did it," he said. The man smiled. "I saw." Eli looked down for a second. "I wouldn't have made it without you," he said softly. The man shook his head. "You would have made it anyway," he said. "I just gave you a chance to walk the path with both feet." Eli smiled. Later that day, Eli got another surprise. The man handed him an envelope. "What's this?" Eli asked. "Open it," he said. Inside was a letter, official, signed, approved, a full scholarship to college, for social work. Eli stared at it for a long time. He had been thinking about it for weeks, wondering if it was possible, if he could afford it, if he deserved it. Now he had his answer. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he blinked them away. He looked up. "Thank you," he said again. The man placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is your next step," he said. "Keep going." And Eli knew he would because he had been given a chance, and now he was going to give that chance to others. Years passed. The city changed a little. Some buildings came down. New ones went up. Life kept moving forward, like it always does. But some things didn't change, like the small apartment building on the corner of Maple and Fifth. Inside, life was still going on. People came and went. Some stayed longer than others. But one thing had become clear. This wasn't just a place to live anymore. It was a community, and it all started with someone seeing another person. Really seeing them, and choosing to do something about it. Eli was back. He stood outside the building one warm spring morning, holding a small bag in one hand and smiling as he looked up at the windows. He had come home, not to live here again. He had his own place now, closer to school. But he came back often, not because he had to, because he wanted to. Inside, he walked down the hallway, waving at people as they passed. "Hey, Eli," called Mrs. Ruiz from her doorway. "You're early today." "I wanted to stop by before class," he said, smiling. She waved him over. "You know Leo's back?" she asked. Eli's eyes lit up. "Really?" Leo was the same boy who used to sit quietly in the youth program years ago, the one who once asked Eli if he ever felt like giving up. Now Leo was older, still quiet, but stronger. He had found his voice over time, and now he sat in the same room Eli once did, helping younger kids the way Eli had helped him. That was the way it worked now. People helped each other, because that's what Eli had started. Upstairs, Eli knocked on the office door. There was a pause. Then the door opened. Standing there was the man, the one who had changed everything. He smiled when he saw Eli. "Look who's back," he said. Eli stepped inside. "Just checking in," Eli said. The man chuckled. "You check in more than most." Eli shrugged. "I owe you that much." The man shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." They sat down. For a while they just talked. About school, about the program, about how the building had changed since Eli first moved in. "It feels different now," Eli said. "Like everyone looks out for each other." The man nodded. "That's because we started seeing each other." Eli smiled. Back then he had been alone, just trying to survive. Now, he was studying social work, helping young people find their path. He had gone from needing help to giving it, and the man, he had changed too. He still owned the building, still owned others across the city, but he didn't hide behind paperwork anymore. He walked through the halls, talked to people, listened. He even started a new program, Hidden Hands, a quiet way to help tenants who were struggling without making them ask. No cameras, no judgment, just support. Sometimes it was just a few extra days on rent. Other times it was food or clothing. Sometimes it was just someone to talk to, but every time it made a difference. Outside the sun was bright. Kids played in the park. A breeze carried the smell of fresh flowers from the garden. Inside, Eli looked around the office. "You remember the first time I came in here?" he asked. The man smiled. "How could I forget you were soaked from the rain?" Eli laughed. "I was scared. I could tell." There was a pause. Then Eli said, "I didn't think anyone would see me." The man leaned back in his chair. "We all get missed sometimes," he said. "But once someone sees you, it changes everything." Eli nodded. It already had. Later that day, Eli walked into the small room downstairs, the one they used for tutoring and mentoring. Inside, a group of kids sat around a table. Some were doing homework. Others were talking quietly. One girl looked up when Eli walked in. Her name was Kayla. She was new to the building, young, quiet, eyes full of worry. She had heard stories about Eli, how he used to live alone, how he used to miss meals, how he used to stay up late studying, and how he never gave up. Eli pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. "Hey," he said gently, "mind if I join?" Kayla shook her head. Eli looked at the paper in front of her. Math problems. She was stuck on one. He pointed at the page. "Let's try this together," he said. And as they worked, something familiar happened. Hope. Not loud. Not flashy. Just quiet. Growing, like it always did. Outside, the world kept turning. People came and went. Seasons changed. But inside that building, something real was happening. People were being seen. People were being helped. And because of that, lives were being changed. All because one person chose to look closer, to see someone else, and to do something about it.